Okay, let's unpack this. We've got quite a stack of sources here, diving deep into high-speed connectivity. We're talking Thunderbolt and USB4.
Right. These are the technologies really designed to simplify all those external connections, aiming for that single cable dream we keep hearing about.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive, which is built from your collection of articles and notes, is really to cut through the complexity. We want to figure out how these techs actually work,
Yeah, under the hood.
what they let you do in the real world, how they've evolved, and crucially, how they stack up against each other and, well, other ways you connect stuff.
Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to getting properly informed on these high-speed cables connecting your digital life, especially since they're all converging on that familiar USB-C port.
So let's start right there with the physical connection. Both Thunderbolt, well, from version 3 onwards, and USB4, they use the same connector, USB-C.
Which is a fantastic connector, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Small, reversible, much better than fumbling with those old USB-A plugs. And you see it everywhere now.
Right. But here's where the confusion often starts, and it's a really crucial point from the sources. That USB-C connector by itself tells you almost nothing about speed or features.
Oh.
A port that looks like USB-C could be stuck at old USB 2.0 speeds, or it could be the latest, fastest Thunderbolt.
That variability is absolutely key.
Yeah.
Just because the cable fits doesn't mean you're getting, the performance you think you are. The connector's just the shape, the tech inside the port. That's what determines what it can actually do.
Okay, so what is that tech inside?
The core innovation, the thing enabling these speeds and versatility, it's called protocol tunneling.
Right. Imagine like a high-speed tunnel. Instead of needing separate physical paths for different kinds of digital traffic, like data from a USB drive, video for a monitor, and that super fast internal connection stuff, PCIe data.
PCIe. Yeah, let's quickly touch on that. PCIe, Peripheral Component Interconnect Express. That's basically the super fast highway inside your computer, connecting things like your graphics card or your really fast SSDs directly to the processor, right?
Yep.
Exactly. And getting that kind of speed outside the computer was always the challenge. Tunneling basically wraps all these different types of traffic, USB, DisplayPort video, that PCIe data, into one unified stream that goes over the single cable.
Like putting different types of vehicles into dedicated lanes within the same tunnel?
Sort of, yeah. And the USB4 architecture has specific bits like routers and adapters that handle this wrapping and unwrapping, making sure everything gets where it needs to go. There's even a TMU, a time management unit, to keep it all perfectly synced up.
Okay, and building on that tunneling idea is dynamic bandwidth allocation. This sounds really clever.
It is. Instead of saying, okay, this much speed is always for video, this much is always for data, the total speed of the connection, say 40 gigabits per second, is shared dynamically.
So it adjusts on the fly?
Yeah, the system looks at what needs bandwidth right now and gives it a slice of the pie. If you're pushing pixels to a high-res monitor, the display signal gets a big chunk. But then, if you start copying a huge file to an external drive, the system automatically gives more of the leftover bandwidth to that data transfer.
So it's fluid, not fixed lanes.
Exactly. But, and this is a nuance the sources point out, display data usually gets priority.
To keep the picture smooth, I guess.
Precisely. But that means the actual usable data bandwidth for things like your external SSD or other USB devices might be less than the headline speed, because the display is already taking its share.
So the simple look of USB-C hides some pretty complex juggling underneath, which explains why just seeing USB-C isn't enough and why you need to look for clearer labels like that Thunderbolt Lightning Bolt logo to know what you're really getting.
Definitely. Let's try and visualize this. Picture a common setup. Modern laptop maybe only has USB-C ports. You plug one cable into a docking station on your desk.
Okay, yeah. And connected to that dock is your whole setup. Maybe a couple of 4K monitors, maybe one of those super fast external NVMe SSDs.
Hold on. Let's quickly define NVMe too, because it comes up a lot. Non-volatile memory express. It's just a protocol, really. A super efficient way for fast storage, like modern SSDs, to talk directly over that PCIe highway we mentioned. So an NVMe SSD is just an SSD built for speed using PCIe.
Got it. So monitors, NVMe drive, maybe an Ethernet cable for wired internet, keyboard, mouse, webcam, the usual stuff.
And that one USB-C cable from the laptop to the dock is carrying all of it.
Yeah.
At the same time, inside the laptop and the dock, controllers are managing this whole flow.
So DisplayPort signals for the monitors, the PCIe traffic for that fast SSD, standard USB data for the keyboard and mouse, all wrapped up, tunneled together over that single cable.
And the dynamic allocation is happening right there. On a typical 40 GBPs link, those 4K monitors are using, 14 to 26 GBPs, depending on the specifics.
Okay, so a big chunk, potentially.
Yeah, and the rest of that 40 GBPs is then shared dynamically. You
Mm.
copy a big file, the PCIe tunnel gets a big slice, you hop on a video call, network traffic gets what it needs, it's constantly shifting.
And power, too, right? That same cable often charges the laptop.
Absolutely. For Thunderbolt 4 and typical USB4, that's often up to 100 watts, plenty for most laptops. And the newer standards are pushing that even higher, up to 240 watts with EPR.
EPR, extended power range. Okay.
Yeah, so even more power-hungry laptops or faster charging.
It's pretty amazing, one cable doing data, display, power, network. But it also means, like you said, that while the link is 40 GBPs, the actual speed you see when copying files might be closer to, say, 22, 25 GBPs if your monitors are running.
Right, because that bandwidth is being shared. Intelligently, but shared nonetheless.
So what does all this tech actually unlock for you, the user? What are the real-world impacts?
Well, they enable some pretty powerful capabilities.
Like external GPUs. That gets a lot of buzz. Connecting a desktop graphics card to a laptop via usually Thunderbolt.
The appeal is obvious, right? You get desktop-level graphics power on a portable machine, great for gaming, video editing, that kind of demanding stuff. And you can potentially upgrade the GPU later, separately from the laptop.
Makes sense. But the sources had some interesting caveats. You mentioned it connects typically as PCIe by 4. What's that mean practically?
So remember, PCIe is that internal highway. Inside a desktop, a graphics card usually gets a wide by 16 lane connection. Bringing it out over a Thunderbolt or USB4 often narrows that down to by 4 lanes.
Half lanes on the highway.
Exactly. Still fast, but not as fast as internal. So you typically see maybe a 10-30% performance hit compared to the same GPU inside a desktop.
And the really weird bit from that user note, even if other ports on the eGPU box, like USB ports, aren't being used, just having them there can slow down the GPU.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah, one user saw a big performance drop, like 15 to 55% in games, just because those other components were physically connected to the same internal circuitry inside the eGPU enclosure, even if they were idle.
Huh. It really shows how everything shares that connection.
It does. Everything on that bus can potentially affect everything else.
Okay, another huge impact. High-speed storage. Connecting those really fast NVMe SSDs externally.
Oh yeah, this is a game changer. Forget the speeds you got with old USB hard drives. The sources were quoting benchmarks like 2,900 megabytes per second read, 3,000 write, with a good NVMe drive and a Thunderbolt enclosure.
Wow, that's basically internal drive speed.
Pretty much. Makes it totally feasible to edit video directly off an external drive, run virtual machines, even boot an OS from it.
And for a lot of people, I suspect the biggest day-to-day impact is just single cable docking.
Absolutely. It's the dream, isn't it? Walk up to your desk, plug in one cable, and bam, monitors light up. Keyboard and mouse work, networks connected, laptops charging.
Cuts down cable clutter massively. Makes moving between home and office or just room to room so much easier.
For sure. Though, as the sources stress, docks themselves vary a lot. You really have to read the fine print.
Check the specs carefully, yeah. Does it support the monitor resolutions you need? Does it supply enough power for your specific laptop? Does it have the right mix of USB ports?
Definitely. And for creative pros, video and audio folks, that high bandwidth and low latency is massive.
Right.
Connecting pro video gear for editing 4K, even 8K streams, or multi-channel audio interfaces where you need super low latency for recording. Thunderbolt and high-end USB4 make that possible externally.
Yeah, you see companies like Blackmagic, AJA, Universal Audio, MOTU. Their gear often relies heavily on this.
And finally, there's daisy chaining. This is mostly a Thunderbolt feature, less common on basic USB4.
This is where you connect one device to the computer, then another device to the first one, and so on.
Exactly. You can string together like 5 or 6 compatible Thunderbolt devices from a single port on your computer.
Can reduce cable runs back to the laptop itself?
It can, but it requires devices that have 2 Thunderbolt ports, one in, one out. And if you chain too many high bandwidth things together, performance can drop for devices further down the line. Often, for a mix of peripherals, a dock is just more practical.
Okay, so that's what they enable. How do Thunderbolt and USB4 really compare to what we had before or to other specialized ports?
Well, compared to older USB, like USB 3.2, it's not just the speed jump, 40 GBPs versus 5, 10, or 20. The fundamental difference is how they handle different kinds of data.
Older USB was mostly just data, right? Maybe some basic video using DisplayPort alt mode, but that often killed your data speed.
Exactly. DP alt mode could hijack the whole connection.
Hmm.
Thunderbolt and USB4 have that proper tunneling we talked about, carrying PCIe, DisplayPort, and USB simultaneously, sharing the bandwidth dynamically. That's the core advantage. Plus, that Thunderbolt 3 compatibility is only optional in base USB4.
What about versus just using a dedicated DisplayPort or HDMI cable for your monitor?
Well, those cables are great for just display. But the advantage of USB4 Thunderbolt is convergence, getting display, data, and power over that single USB-C cable. And the way they tunnel DisplayPort is generally more flexible than the old alt mode, letting you run faster data alongside the video.
Okay. And then there's this other thing that pops up, Oculink, sometimes mentioned for eGPUs.
Oculink. It's basically a way to get a very direct, raw PCIe connection outside the computer. At its best, like Oculink using PCIe 4.0 by 4 lanes, it can offer similar PCIe bandwidth to something like Thunderbolt 5.
So potentially very fast for PCIe-specific things.
Yes, some niche high-performance eGPU or storage solutions use it.
But what are the downsides?
Big ones. Oculink is only PCIe. Yeah. That cable carries no power, no display signal, no standard USB data, just PCIe. It also usually requires a reboot to connect. It's not typically hot-swappable like USB or Thunderbolt, and it uses a completely different bulkier connector, and ports are pretty rare.
So Oculink is kind of a specialized tool for maximum raw PCIe throughput, but lacks all the versatility.
Exactly. Thunderbolt and USB4 are the all-rounders. They bring everything together over that common hot-swappable USB-C port. That versatility is their killer feature, as the comparison charts and the sources show.
And these technologies haven't stood still, obviously. They keep evolving.
Absolutely. It's been quite a journey.
Let's trace that path. Thunderbolt 3, around 2015, that was the big one, right? Introduced 40 GBPs, moved to USB-C, brought PCIe tunneling outside the box, and then Intel contributed that tech to form the basis of USB4.
Correct. Then came Thunderbolt 4, around 2020, and interestingly, it didn't actually increase the maximum speed, still 40 GBPs.
Right, that was surprising. So what did it do?
It raised the minimum requirements for certification. That was the key thing.
Okay. So less about peak speed, more about guaranteeing a consistent, high-quality experience.
Precisely. TB4 mandated faster minimum PCIe tunneling speed, 32 GBPs. It mandated support for dual 4K displays or a single 8K. It mandated laptop charging capability on at least one port, mandated better security features, and ensured certified cables up to 2 meters worked at full speed.
So if you saw that Thunderbolt 4 logo, you knew you were getting a certain high standard.
Exactly. Much less guesswork involved.
And now, the latest step. Announced late 2023, products just starting to trickle out. Thunderbolt 5. This one does bring a speed bump, right?
A big one. Thunderbolt 5 doubles the standard bidirectional speed to 80 GBPs. But it also introduces this clever asymmetric capability using a new signaling tech called PAM3.
The PAM3, Pulse Amplitude Modulation 3 level, in simple terms.
Basically, instead of just sending signals representing a 0 or a 1, it uses 3 distinct voltage levels. It lets you pack more data into each signal pulse.
Okay.
This allows for that asymmetric mode where you can blast up to 120 GBPs in one direction, perfect for driving, say, a single extremely high-res, high-refresh monitor, while still getting 40 GBPs back the other way.
Very cool. And TB5 doubles the PCIe speed again.
Yep. Up to 64 GBPs total, which is equivalent to PCIe 4.0 by 4 lanes. Huge for storage and eGPUs. It also integrates the latest DisplayPort 2.1 standard for even better monitor support, multiple 8K high refresh rates. And like we said, power delivery jumps up to 240W with EPR support. Yeah. It's all built on the underlying USB4 version 2.0 spec.
Which neatly brings us to the USB4 standard itself and what the sources really flag as a big issue, optionality.
Yeah, this is where it gets messy for consumers. USB 4 started with version 1.0 based on Thunderbolt 3, defining 20 GBPs and 40 GBPs speed tiers. Then version 2.0 came along, adding the 80 GBP symmetric and 1240-20 GBPs asymmetric modes matching Thunderbolt 5.
But the problem is a lot of the really good stuff speeds above 20 GBPs, compatibility with older Thunderbolt devices, that crucial PCIe tunneling for eGPUs and fast storage, even specific display capabilities. They're all listed as optional for manufacturers implementing USB 4.
Exactly right. So you can buy a laptop or a device that just says USB 4 on the port, and it might only give you 20 GBP speed and lack PCIe tunneling completely. Even Microsoft pointed out that many PCs sold with USB4 had limited features because manufacturers didn't implement the optional parts.
So USB4 aims for convergence and flexibility, but that pick-and-choose approach creates a lot of potential confusion for users. You don't really know what you're getting just from the USB4 label alone.
And this is where the Thunderbolt certification really shines. That logo is a guarantee. See Thunderbolt 4. You get 40 GBPs, 32 GBPs, PCIe dual 4K charging. See Thunderbolt 5. You get the 8120 GBP speeds, 64 GBP is PCIe, DP 2.1, 240 WEPR potential. It cuts through the confusion.
Yeah, the feature comparison table in the sources makes that clear. Thunderbolt tends to introduce and mandate the premium features first, and then USB4 incorporates them, but often as options.
Looking ahead beyond TB5 and USB4 V2, well, the need for speed isn't stopping. Think AI, VRR becoming more mainstream, 8K and higher resolution video. We're going to need speeds beyond 120 GBPs before too long.
And copper cables start to struggle at those speeds and distances, right?
They really do. Signal integrity becomes a huge challenge. That's why optical interconnects using light pulses down fiber optic cables instead of electrical signals down copper are very likely the future for the highest speeds and longer cable runs.
Faster, longer reach, no electrical interference.
Exactly. USB4 technically already supports optical cables, but future standards might lean on them much more heavily.
We'll probably also see things like tighter integration of these controllers directly into the main chipsets in computers, maybe smarter OS level management.
And, continued focus on power efficiency, security, maybe even better ways for devices to dynamically share resources.
But it always takes time, doesn't it? For the latest stuff like Thunderbolt 5 and full-featured USB4 V2.0 to become widely available and crucially affordable, backward compatibility is key during these transitions.
Absolutely. So just to wrap up where we've been, we traced the path from Intel's proprietary Thunderbolt, bringing high-speed and PCIe outside the box, influencing the unified USB4 standard, all landing on that versatile USB-C connector.
And the core magic is that protocol tunneling and dynamic bandwidth sharing, which makes the single-cable Dream Data display power a reality.
The key thing for you, the listener, is that while USB4 offers potential, its optional features can make it confusing. Looking for that Thunderbolt logo really does give you a clearer guarantee of a premium, high-performance experience.
And the latest standards, Thunderbolt 5 and USB4 version 2.0, are a massive leap forward, pushing speeds, display capabilities, and power delivery significantly.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. With speeds constantly climbing and optical tech potentially around the corner, how might the way we connect everything, maybe even how we think about computing itself, change in the next few years as this stuff keeps evolving?
Definitely something to think about as our digital world just keeps getting faster.